It's official. Your favorite shows are becoming exclusive. Introducing Flicks. Beginning July 3rd, F Network will introduce an exclusive, enhanced viewing experience for passport holders with access to free content all year long. So sign up for your F Network passport today. It's fast, simple, and free. You've seen his work everywhere. You just don't know it. What's up, everybody? Melissa No here with this week's episode of Framed. Today, we are seeing a side of photography that we have not yet seen on a Framed episode, high-end retouching. Let's do this. I want to just dive in to you first.
Sure.
Why retouching?
Well, retouching because as a child growing up, I've always been into the arts. I've loved drawing ever since I was in kindergarten, and it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I just happened to have it because of influence from my teachers and parents, and I would go to school, and the only thing I'd look forward to is actually artwork. And with the progression of how digital technology is going with cameras, it just felt like a perfect marriage of having art, drawing, and photography. It was perfect. It felt like I was drawing to another level. So retouching just fell into place by itself. It just fell in my lap, so to speak.
Did you start with photography? Did you ever do photography?
I did. So I picked up my first camera. I started shooting. I signed a website called Model Mayhem, which obviously, where stylists and photographers gather together and they shoot. And then I realized that this whole other industry of retouching where you modify people and you see the covers. The only thing I really knew about retouching at that point was people told me that they used to airbrush photos, and I was kind of intrigued because no one could offer me any more information other than the fact that they airbrush photos. So I began to actually research into it and look into the industry, and I found that there wasn't much out there to learn from. And it kind of bothered me because with someone being so interested in the field, I wanted to know as much as I could. So it kind of fell into place, and it made me want to learn more. And when I picked up my first camera and started shooting, instead of shooting, I realized I enjoyed editing photos more. And in fact, the first photo shoot I had, I never edited my photos at all. I just put them out there. And people asked me, why didn't you edit your photos? They look so much better if you edit them. And I said, well, yeah, I guess I could do something, And then I started learning slowly, and then people started asking me, what did I do to my photos? And I said, really nothing much. And I had my previous Photoshop background and my art background, put them together. Most of what I do is on the editorial side of things, so I do a lot of Marie Claire, Elle, ZINK, Vogue, GQ, that type of stuff. Exactly.
Well, I think you are so talented, not just from a retouching standpoint. I read your blog post, I read your writings, you're so with it with what's going on in the industry, and you're very much an inspiration to me, so I'm so glad that you're
appreciate
here.
That.
Yeah.
So there are two things we're going to do today.
Okay.
One of the things we're going to do today is I'm going to be having a photo shoot with you today.
Really?
Yes, and do you know why?
Why?
Because a lot of photographers ask me, how can I shoot to help speed up my time in retouching? What can I do to get right in the camera as much as possible so that I could do less in post? So I'm going to be kind of doing a mock shoot and guiding you before actual shoot and showing you, how things should be done as much as possible to help save you time. And then the second thing we're going to be doing is I'm going to be showing a couple of Photoshop demonstrations, a couple of tutorials that people have asked me to do.
Oh.
I've been really commonly asked.
Let's do this. I knew I was excited for today.
What we're basically going to be doing is putting a mock shoot together. So I figured I'd throw in a few tips that I encounter when I'm doing post work and show you how you can fix it before the shoot even begins.
That's a cool idea, for sure.
So let's start by talking about some of the makeup areas. One of the first things you want to establish is a good foundation. And a lot of makeup artists come to me and say that, you know, saving time in the post work happens because of the makeup. And that's why I said, again, I love good makeup artists, is because they save a lot of time for my job. And
I did my makeup in the car.
So, and she did relatively very good today. So we're going impromptu, as she was surprised.
Okay.
And one of the key things you want to look for is first a good foundation, and you want to make sure that your foundation matches the rest of the body.
Okay.
The second thing is you want to make sure your lip line and your eye line is as straight as possible.
Oh.
Especially your lip lines, because half the time you end up going and fixing or making it straighter, and people mess it up because there's a big contrast between the upper lip and the lip itself. It has a lot more, you know, texture and contrast.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that's as straight as possible. And I always recommend that if you have a makeup artist on set, go in there and analyze kind of after the fact that once they're done, and do a double check and see if everything's as good as possible. Because if it's not, you can go back and say, can you please straighten out this little bit, and make sure that, you know, they're tightening their lip and getting in all the little gaps. And of course, you want to make sure that if you're doing any type, and here's the biggest cost saver, if you're doing any type of mascara or any fake eyelashes, make sure that there's, number one, no glue visible. Number two, that everything is placed perfectly and nothing is peeling. Because during the shoot, what will happen, and a lot of times I get this on a beauty shoot, is they'll come to me and say, can you please reattach the fake eyelashes? Which is very expensive because you have to do a lot of warping and manipulating to get that in and make it look realistic. And secondly, you want to, of course, make sure once that's all done, is if there's any contouring involved on the face to accentuate areas, make sure that it's either not underdone or overdone. Because if it's underdone, it won't show up on camera as much and you have to accentuate it a lot more later. But if it's overdone, it's even worse. So if you have to be safe, underdo it a little bit and then pull it up later.
Okay.
Or you can take a shot and show the makeup artist and say, you know, this is what the makeup looks like in camera. Do you want to darken anything up based on the lighting? Because lighting will wash it out, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know. So that's pretty much makeup 101 in terms of what I look for as a retoucher. And I'm not saying this is what all makeup artists do. By all means, I'm not a makeup artist. I'm just, you know, a retoucher.
But you know what looks good. You know what helps with retouching
exactly.
time. That's
I know
cool.
what to look for to help you save time so that you don't have to do all these unnecessary things and you can go on and do other things. So I'm going to go and actually tame down some of our flyaways because this will end up saving you a lot of time, and I do spend a lot of time on flyaways. I do a lot of studio work, especially for beauty or fashion. And it's a lot harsher. You know, we have beauty dishes or grids. And one of the things that does is it makes more contrast on the face, which emphasizes a lot more flaws. And which again emphasizes the time you need to spend retouching. But if you have something like this where it's very soft and gentle, it makes it a lot more easier to retouch in the end because it's almost masking away the flaws. It's like post-makeup makeup, if you can think of it that way. Basically, my setup is nothing fancy. We're going on the fly again. I have my 5D here, 28, 75, 2.8 for my lens. And the reason I do this is because I can do closer macro shots if I wanted to, or pull back if I wanted to. And this is the equivalent to the Canon 2470, if you want to think of it that way. And again, one of the things that I've done is I've put the light bank over here to kind of replicate what it would have been like had the sun been out right now and filled in everything. So we have some window light coming in and the rest of it's filling in the rest. And so you're gonna get a really nice soft look. And then we have the rim light just accentuating you. there used to be a lot of issues with retouching. You couldn't find out information, but people now, especially my generation, they're trying to bring the information to the forefront and try to say that, you know, retouching isn't very, before people used to think retouching isn't very time consuming, but actually it's very time consuming. You know, it takes a lot of quality of work, and it takes the time, and you have to put the time in, and you can't find somebody who's very quick and cheap, because you end up messing up your files, and it costs you in the long run.
Right. Why is it that, I mean, you've got hairstylists. You have to know hair. You have to know makeup. You have to know when something was meant to be darker, right? I mean, is that kind of what you're saying?
It's the aesthetics about it, especially with makeup. If your makeup lines aren't straight or things like that, many people don't even realize. Many of the makeup artists don't even realize when they're doing a bad job. The good ones will know, which is why we love them so much. As a retoucher, we love good makeup artists. But when you get the files back at home, and you see all the things you have to fix, you're realizing what you're doing isn't retouching anymore. It's actually fixing people's mistakes.
Wow.
And you don't want to be fixing people's mistakes. You want to be actually enhancing the beauty of the original file.
I think that is such a fascinating aspect of what you do. I didn't even think about that. Obviously, right now we're going to kind of get a condensed version of your retouching class.
So usually what happens is I have classes that I put on for photographers because at the moment, there isn't really anything where you can have a one-on-one with somebody in person to go over all your individual weaknesses with retouching from everything you can imagine that you shoot personally, because what you shoot is different from somebody else. So I put a website together, retouchingclasses.com, which you can contact me and we have a one-on-one session and go through for 2 days. We go through pretty much everything retouching entails. It makes it quick, efficient, and easy, so you can get back into shooting and away from the computer.
Right. Cool. Okay. Retouch. What was the website?
Retouchingclasses.com.
Retouchingclasses.com. So give us a little sneak today of what you usually do in there. Can you do
Sure,
that?
absolutely.
Okay.
This is a completely unretouched file. So we have a good basis for what many photographers may like for their work if they're shooting this type of style.
Right.
And so what we're going to actually do is go in and talk, instead of going through a full overview of a complete retouch, I'm going to go over some quick things to help photographers go further. So one of the things we also noticed was we only spend 2 minutes shooting. And one of the things that I like to do during the shoot is making sure that your expression stays paramount. Because at the end, you only use shots where the expression comes through.
Right.
And even though that was your first look and your first 10 frames, you nailed it, and I saw that right away because I didn't interrupt the shoot. So one of the things you also want to think about now is what plan to action do you want to conjure up so that you spend less time retouching. And this principle is something that I use as well. I'm looking at the file right now, and I'm thinking, first of all, what is my output going to be? It's primarily going to be for print and web.
Okay.
It's not going to go much higher than maybe 16 by 20 or 8 by 10s, which is kind of the view we're looking at right now.
Sure.
So what you want to do is you can either set a blank layer and go ahead and start circling some of the key areas that you want to identify while you are physically going in and looking at your photo. Because this allows you to tackle the areas that you want to stay focused on. And the other reason is people start zooming in at 100% and working their way outwards. And what happens if you start at 100%, and Melissa's probably cringing right now, is you end up seeing way more than you should actually be seeing.
Right.
And you have to remember that most people don't see those details when you have your final output. And you know, it's different for me because sometimes we do enlarge them to billboard size and things, so we do have to polish it to complete perfection. But if you're just doing print or web, keep those factors in mind, because otherwise you'll be wasting more time than most people care about.
Definitely.
And they won't even notice your work to begin with. Some of the things that I would like to target are some of the flyaways that are still left. You see, we were able to tackle most of them with the hairspray,
Right.
which ended up saving a lot of time, because if I had not done that, we would have had a lot more flyaways than we would have intended.
For sure.
So, you know, we have some of the flyaways here and here. There are some issues. We have some here or here.
Well, and I noticed that because you shot so wide open,
Exactly.
you kind of fuzzed away some of the things that were a little more imperfectious.
Exactly. And they tend to fall within your natural hairstyle because you did tease it intentionally.
Oh, I ratted it.
Yeah,
I sure did.
so it actually suits the look very well. And, you know, it goes
Cool.
part of
exactly what we're doing. Secondly, a lot of people like to get rid of laugh lines or little frown lines like that. I don't like to get rid of them unless it's specifically directed or for editorial purposes, because they add a lot of character to the picture.
Sure.
And especially for a lot of shooters, they don't always remove everything. Same for the under eyes. I will lighten this area a bit, but I won't get rid of it completely either. But I will still teach you how you can if you'd like to. So the first thing I'm going to do, most people like to duplicate their background file. I don't really have to duplicate it because of the process that we're going to be taking. And you'll see what I mean when I go to the next step. I'm going to set a blank layer. And this is where I label it my cleaning layer. And what cleaning means, it's basically like a polishing effect where we're getting rid of all the things that we had seen originally through healing brush or the clone brush. And the first go-to tool that I like to use is my healing brush right here. And what that basically allows you to do is it's very similar to the patch tool, but you're able to get a much smaller area. And the reason why you want to get as much of a smaller area as possible is so you leave the skin as natural as it were before. So you don't have to use a patch tool where you select a complete large area and drag it, because that alters the skin too much. And every area of the skin has a different texture profile, so you can't move things around as much as you like. So with this in mind, with your blank layer, you want to make sure it's set to current and below. And what this does is it works like a regular healing brush.
Okay.
Where you sample by holding the option, and I'm on a Mac, of course. And you option click the sample that you want, and then you start brushing in the area that you'd like to replace. And it obviously starts getting rid of the hairs and keeps the texture as clean and as intact as possible. And the same goes for this guy in the background. And you can also switch to your clone brush and make sure it's set to current and below. And it does the exact same thing. You can sample and paint if that's an easier system for you.
Right. Would you say that you're a perfectionist?
I am, and I'm purposely holding back
Are you?
on many of the smaller things.
Okay.
But I'm doing this as a demonstration that you don't have to do so much. And the other reason is sometimes when you do too much, you get carried away and it starts looking really bad, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So you would end up naturally continuing on and cleaning up all the areas that are bothering you. And that's a very individual thing. It's up to you and your artistic direction. That's what makes you an artist.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And you notice I'm actually staying quite zoomed out intentionally so that I end up targeting just the areas that I want to remove. You don't have to remove everything. The next step is once you're happy with your cleaning work, you want to start by lightening or darkening areas that are too light or too dark.
You use dodge and burn for that?
I
or
do.
What do you do? Okay.
I do. I use dodge and burn, and the reason for that is you're able to even out some of the areas. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my adjustment layers, and if you're not familiar with that, they're right here if you've never used them before, and a lot of people haven't. So you go in and you go to your curves, which is like bringing up your exposure.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this middle area here and bring up the curves right here. So right below the next notch above. And I'm going to make the mask black. I'll explain why in a minute.
Okay.
So I'll name this my dodge layer. I'll do it again, but this time going the opposite way. I'll name this my burn layer and also make the mask black. And to make the mask black, you have to make sure that you're selected on the mask, because by default it'll select on the physical adjustment layer. So you make sure your mask is selected and go to Command I, and it'll end up masking it out. The reason why you want to do this is you want to use this as a tool to just bring out small areas that you notice are standing out in the image. And to further facilitate the process, you can set one more adjustment layer with a completely desaturated image. The reason why I'm doing this is going to be making it easy for you to physically look at all the areas that you want to lighten up or darken.
Sure.
Because, you know, an artistic value is colors start bombarding your eyes and it affects your tonal ranges. Because after all, color is light and light is color. So you want to separate the two and make it easy for yourself, because that's the key, is making retouching easier for yourself.
Wow, that's a great point.
So we're going to have our dodge, which is our lightening area. And now we can physically see some of the areas that we want to enhance. If you still need additional help, you can add another one. And you can add contrast, and you see you get a lot more transition.
Oh yeah.
Right, but that's individual preference. And if you'd like to, you can. It just makes the work a lot more intense
Sure.
too. So we'll go back to our dodge layer, and you see some of the areas that we need dodging. So with my brush, you can keep it at 100% opacity and 1% flow, or vice versa. And what this does is it keeps your brush very light.
Why flow and opacity?
Well, flow is basically a control mechanism. For example, if you have a brush and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to paint white on black. If I keep brushing, you see the slow buildup?
Right.
That allows me to get really precise control. Because without that, what happens is the brush becomes too fast and you go too far ahead of
Got
yourself.
it. Okay.
So you want to keep a very light consistency with your brush.
Okay.
The primary difference is if I go the other way, every time I stroke, I have to lift up my pen again and stroke again to apply the next level. So it builds, but it builds by picking up the brush, not to push it back down
Interesting.
again.
Okay. I'm with you.
That's why I like flow better, because I don't have to pick up the brush at all. I can just leave my brush down and it just builds by itself. With flow,
Definitely.
with opacity, it just stops at the percentage you're at.
Okay.
So I'm going to go back to this image, this lovely image we shot. And I'm going to have my dodge layer. I have my black mask. I have my white brush. You see my flow is really low in general. And I'm going to start lightening up the areas. And if you zoom out, you can see what those areas are. Some of them are right here on the cheek, some of here under the eyes a little bit, some of them on the ridges. And what happens is the change becomes really gradual and gentle. So you get the gist of what happens. If you turn it on and off, you can see some of the areas that we lightened up. And we didn't do a drastic amount, and I don't want to spend an exorbitant amount of time on it, but you get the idea of what's going on.
Sure.
So you have an area where you can see some of
Wow.
the darker spots are lined up, but it's not so much where it looks unnatural and fake.
Right.
And what you do is you'd end up continuing this process down here, if you like, on the collarbone, and just end up going through the whole thing. The next thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of pop to the makeup and some of the highlights, because I've noticed people like that a lot, especially when you add a lot more detail and drama to the image.
Definitely. Yes, I like drama.
Exactly. So this guy we can delete him because we really don't need him. And so far we only have 3 layers. It's very simple.
Definitely.
So I'm going to set a blank layer and set that to overlay. What this is going to be doing is it's very similar to dodging and burning, but it adds a lot more saturation, contrast, and vibrancy to the colors we touch. We're going to be using a brush, and I'm going to be painting with white or black. Black is going to darken the areas that we paint, and white is going to brighten and add some luster to the areas. So for example, if we want to bring out some of your eyes, and of course there are multiple ways of doing this. I mean, there's quite a lot of ways we can go about to add detail, so this is just one of the ways. So you can see I'm going to be painting with white, and if you hit the X, it toggles to black. When you paint black, it ends up darkening some of the other areas. And you see it adds a lot of pop. And you don't want to go that far because you look like a reptile right now. So you want to push it back and get the adequate amount that you like. And this way you can also darken some of the eyebrows. You can darken some of the lip liner if you'd like. And then you can add some contrast. And of course, I'm switching back to black and white just depending on if you want to make an area darker or lighter. Another thing you can do is if you set another curves layer, you put a point in the middle by clicking on it here. And you add one more point here. And you push this point up. You get a contrast. But I'm not going to apply this to the whole image. I'm going to set my mask to black again. You notice most of my mask starts black, so I can have the most control as possible.
Definitely.
And I'm going to start painting with white to low flow on some of the areas of your garments. So what that will do is it'll add some of the contrast and vibrance back into your clothing. If I turn that on and off, see, it doesn't look as dull anymore.
Right.
So it adds a little more.
Popped
And you can
it.
do that to jewelry too if you'd like. And there you go. So what happens when you combine all these things together into one folder, turn them on and off, the difference is very subtle.
Right.
But the point being is you want to keep it as natural as possible, and you want the expression to stay in the forefront. You want your eyes to navigate towards your eyes more, which is where my natural direction went.
Right.
And of course we have a lot more you can do to the image if you'd like, and this would be just the basis. But I wanted to go over some of the tools that I would think that people would find very effective
Definitely.
in the workflow.
Yes, let's do it. I mean, what you've done, so many people know the photographer of, look at what this amazing photographer did, they're on the cover of Vogue, but you are half of that stylizing and beautifying. Tell us a little bit about how you got from Retoucher to now covers of Vogue, Elle.
Initially started out, as I said, with just my hobby and passion of doing photos on the side for friends and other photographers that were local. And from there, I started building my portfolio of Model Mayhem. And the first things that I did was, I approached photographers and asked them, I noticed that there are not many other retouchers who are also photographers. And I know you have a disconnect because I've approached other retouchers. And so I said, I have a few files if you want to see them, and I'd really love to work with you. With a business background and a marketing background, I was able to effectively communicate and clinch some deals initially, even though I had almost nothing to show for myself. They just really liked my personality and the way that I was able to reach out to them. So they gave me a chance. And I took the chance and I ran with it. And after the first few photographers, I started reaching out to more of them. And they finally started coming to me and saying, I heard about you from one of my friends and associates, and they said that you'd be a good go-to person. Do you have a website? And I'd say, I have a website, but it's still in development. I'd be happy to do a test for you, and just to show you the quality of my work. And so I think with a test, it captures the photographer more, because what happens is if you have a portfolio with just before and afters, you're able to see work, but your work done on somebody else. It doesn't translate as much as if you were doing their files and they see physically before and after of what it looks like.
And your title is Solstice
Correct.
Retoucher. Why Solstice?
Solstice because initially people started establishing their own brand on their name. Now, I was thinking long term. I was thinking, 5, 6, 7 years down the line. I didn't want to be
You've got
just...
a vision.
Exactly.
You're as crazy as we are.
Yeah, exactly. We have a similar mind. We have exactly the same
Cool.
thinking.
What is your vision?
My vision was to build a brand name rather than just on my name alone. I wanted to have a team in the future rather than, my name being the brand.
Now, when you get a fashion, this is what I want to see. What do you do to those beautiful fashion-forward faces?
Perfect. That's a great question, because actually that's a question I get asked most of the time.
Yes.
And luckily I brought a file to show you.
Cool.
which
Now,
allows
is it
you
your
to-
file?
No, it's actually another photographer. His name is Terrence Borden, which is a fashion photographer from San
Okay.
Francisco.
Love it.
And he was generous enough to allow me to demonstrate.
Yes, thank you, kind sir.
Yes.
Woo.
All right, so I'm gonna go
Now we can
back.
stare at somebody else's face.
Yeah,
And she happens to be gorgeous.
very, very gorgeous.
Wow.
This is actually Melissa, but you know,
Look at that Photoshop that you did.
we did that on the break. So,
Oh, Terrence, that is gorgeous.
yeah, and thanks to Terrence for shooting this file because, you know, as I said before, if you shoot it right, you're able to focus on things that make the image pop rather than having to go and fix people's mistakes. I can see some of the makeup is beautiful. I don't have to go fix the eye makeup because her lashes are beautiful.
Right.
You know, things like that. And now you can focus on enhancing it. This tutorial is primarily going to be on how I process black and whites for detail. So I'm going to show you how the before looks.
Whoa!
Yeah, so this is the before, just the complete image that we're going to work on. This is just a JPEG. This is not even a RAW file.
Huh.
And I say this because a lot of times people like me will have to work from the JPEG and deliver it back in a PSD format.
Really?
So I have to do it from the JPEG.
Oh, wow.
So one of the first things I do is you obviously can't just go and desaturate the image. And one of the reasons for that is if you do, what happens is it just looks flat.
Definitely.
And there's no real punch
Her
to the
freckles
file.
are gone.
They're gone. Everything about her that
Yeah.
was beautiful is mellowed out and hidden away. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and actually look in my channels. And the reason I look in my channels is because it offers me a lot more palette in terms of what black and white conversions I can pick from off the bat.
And I love the blue.
Exactly. The blue works so great because it ends up offering us a higher tonal contrast range with the freckles because all that information that we saw, all the detail was in that blue channel.
Definitely.
So
Wow.
now I can just pull this and use it as my base. It's almost like letting Photoshop cheat for you. You know, you're telling Photoshop, hey, do the work for me.
Yeah.
So you're telling him, yeah, this looks great. I'd like to use this file.
Definitely.
And the reason I do this, of course, is the detail. And now you can actually take a copy of this channel and use it as a layer.
Cool.
I'll show you how. And it's actually very simple. A lot of people have get confused about how to do it because it doesn't look as, it's harder than it looks.
Mm-hmm.
You basically hit Command All or Control All, which highlights your entire image.
Okay.
Command C, which copies your whole image. Or you can go to Edit, Copy, or Select All, which is over here.
Mm-hmm.
So you copy, you go back into your layers. You want to add a new blank layer. Once you have a new blank layer, this is where you hit paste. And you're able to bring back your blue channel detail
Right.
as a layer.
Mm.
Now you can use it as a base. The other reason why I like this blue layer was you see the way the eyes just came out
Oh,
all of a
yeah.
sudden? Eyes just came out right away.
Completely popped.
So it made our job well easy. Now I'm gonna go and start by putting all this in a folder so it just keeps it more organized.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see here, a little sneak peek, as you see all my layers categorized into the folder system. Because then you can go back anytime you want and modify anything you want non-destructively.
Definitely.
The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select another adjustment layer. And that's a very common theme is I use adjustment layers a lot because I can modify them at any time I want to. Because you wake up tomorrow or a day after and you look at the file and you don't really like what you've just done.
Mhm.
You can go back and change it. You go into your selective color adjustment layer. Now here's where I start playing out some of the general details. I'm gonna go versus color into blacks. This almost isolates all the shadow regions of the image,
Mm-hmm.
at least for me. And there are many ways to do this in Photoshop because I can imagine some of the comments saying, "Oh well, you could do it this way and this way," and that's very true.
Right.
You can. You can do it many ways. That's the best part about Photoshop. There's no limitations on how to get somewhere.
Yeah, you're getting into places I've never even seen
Exactly.
or touched. Yeah.
So
That's
you can
cool.
you can have a blast, and that's the beauty of learning Photoshop is there's no right way. Don't
Mhm.
ever let anybody tell you there's only one way to do something. Because even what I do is different from somebody else. So
Yeah,
the end
for
goal,
sure.
there's many paths to get there.
Okay.
So now we're under blacks, and you see all these different colors. We're going to be dealing with our tonal regions, with our whites for highlights, grays for midtones, and our blacks for our shadows. Very similar, you know. I
Mhm.
work very color-based because I'm a visual-based
Mhm.
retoucher. Now, under blacks, it gives you an opportunity to adjust or add colors with your CMYK, your cyan, magentas, yellows. Or you can just do with your tones or how rich.
Oh, that's so great.
So you can pop or fade your shadows, which is another great way to fade your shadows, because that's a very popular look, is where they make the shadows really murky. But for this tutorial, I'm going to end up darkening it. And I darken it, and don't worry about all the areas that are blown out, because we're going to recover them later.
You can bring those back.
Exactly, adjustment layers.
Even just doing that, like her eyeliner,
Yeah.
and it made it pop so much.
Just the areas that you want. So it's almost like Photoshop goes into your brain and targets exactly what you want to do and does it for you.
Huh.
The second thing we're going to do is go to our whites, which is our highlights, and then pull back to blacks. You can see the highlight region pop out too.
Wow.
All the specularity that comes, and you can't really do this through curves as well as you can through your selective color,
Right.
because it literally selects your highlight regions and then pops it out for you.
Wow.
And then finally, I'm going to go to my midtones and then push it out a bit so it's a little bit darker, and you can see more of the freckles.
Love it.
So
I love
that's-
her little scar that you're bringing out. Just every little. That's right.
Every little imperfection becomes a perfection in this sense.
Definitely.
Right.
Write that in your book.
Exactly. Imperfections are perfections.
Love it.
And then finally, I'm going to go to my last step in my curves. And I'm going to, these points at the end are for your your brightest highlights and your darkest shadows. And instead of bring your curve up and down, you can actually bring your endpoints in closer. And they work very similar to the way levels works. It's a very linear process, and it darkens your shadows. Like that. And then you can push it out like this. You can see that's way too much.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll do just a bit to emphasize a little bit more. And then finally, what I'm going to do to this folder here is I'm going to put these two adjustment layers in its own folder. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want to mask what I just did, just to reveal the areas that I want to reveal and make sure nothing is missing. Like you can see everything here is gone, it's gone. I want to bring that back so it's more balanced.
Definitely.
So I'm going to add a new mask, and you can mask a folder. A lot of people don't know that. You can mask a folder, so you don't have to individually go and mask every one of these guys. I'm going to invert it to completely black, and you can see all the detail that we changed.
Right.
Let's go back.
You lost part of her lips and
Yeah.
her eye. It's completely gone.
Yeah, it's all gone. You see, and that's not what we want. But we still want that richness. So we want a good compromise. So I'm going to start revealing some of those areas again, really quickly. And you could do it much slower if you want to. But this is a rough process on how to reveal those tones. You can see the area come back that we just blew out previously.
The rest of this is so artist interpretation.
Exactly.
It's your preference.
Exactly, it's all artist interpretation.
What is your overall vision with your retouching? What are your goals?
So, one of, going back to the public viewpoint of how retouching is looked upon, I'll use myself as an example. Before I saw retouching, I assumed that everyone was just airbrushed, and the photography end was very minimal until I picked up the camera, and then I realized how hard it really was. And then I realized after getting to the retouching side that it was a big difference between airbrushing somebody and making someone flawless. And within that category, there's a difference between perfecting a photo and fixing people's flaws. With a lot of photographers today, I realize the mentality that they can Photoshop it later. But the good photographers know that it's not about photoshopping it later, it's about getting it right in the camera and then perfecting on things you can't do in the camera.
Because that's a big debate right now. Whether it's
Exactly.
film shooters, digital, they're like, film, it captures the real person.
Right.
Digital, you're fixing it all the time. So what do you have to say to that?
You know, with film, people used to still retouch back in the day. So
Right.
retouching isn't a new aspect, but it's one that's been growing almost out of control with the mentality of things, you know? I have the same aspect. I believe you have to get it right in the camera. I believe everything should be as perfect as you can so that when you go into the final stages, it's much easier for you to fix things that you couldn't have done on the shoot. Rather than saying, all right, let's get a makeup artist and hairstylist and it's okay if there are a few flaws here and there, we'll fix it later. Which doesn't translate because you have to realize when you take the files into your computer, they're more magnified than they are in person, and you don't see those flaws when you're on set because people are moving around and
Sure.
you don't analyze, you're busy doing other things. So the key emphasis is I am very much like a film shooter in my head. I believe get it right in the camera as much as possible, keep things as natural as possible, and don't overdo things and have a sense of reality. Because you have to think about it in a photographer's perspective or in a model's perspective. You have to remember they want to keep the file as beautiful as possible. And it's great to have your own artistic interpretation, but you want to remember that they're people and they're not dolls. And you know, you spend all this money on expensive lights and gear, and you know, you shoot and everything's sharp, it's beautiful, but then you go and damage your files by blurring it to death. Well, I mean, really, what's the point of that? You could have just bought a $50 lens if you really wanted to. So keep the beauty of it. Keep the soul of the file. Don't destroy the original soul that the file had. Well, that's what made it beautiful in the first place.
Soul. I love that. Put that in a freaking book.
Exactly.
Sell
Quotes
it.
to remember.
Quotes to remember, Pratik. That is really cool.
I'm Pratik Naik, retoucher and owner of Solstice Retouch, and I've been framed.
Frame Season 3 was brought to you by Bay Photo Lab. Like the music? Special thanks to Triple Scoop Music. Frame Network giveaways are brought to you by B&H. Head to giveaways.framenetwork.com for your chance to win. Find out more about the equipment used in this episode on framenetwork.com.